coming on today to talk about kids and how you know if your kid has a disrupted gut-brain axis. I think nowadays we are having more and more people who have lived their whole life with symptoms of chronic illness, and people who have been sick their whole lives are having kids who are also born sick or born with disruptions in the gut microbiome and the immune system, the nervous system, and the brain. And so we really need to start taking a step back, and we really need to start remembering and looking at the clinical data and the evidence around what are normal childhood issues, right? What are signs that your kid is having a normal and healthy development versus what is going on with your kid that is maybe common, right? Maybe all your kids' little friends have these issues too, but are not actually normal and are signs of an imbalance or a disruption going on in the gut-brain axis that ideally should be intervened with right away so that they do not develop into more serious issues later on in life. So I'm going to be going through all of that and just providing some education and some tips around how to work with kids in getting these things rebalanced and how to assess what is going on with your kids. I am partly doing this video to help promote my clinician on staff, Suzanne Balestino. Suzanne is such a powerhouse. She had her own really inspiring journey. She's been a registered nurse for years and years, but her daughter got very ill and she could not find answers in the conventional Western medical system. I actually have an interview with her that I did last year talking about her daughter's incredible recovery from pretty significant chronic illness as a teenager. And it just really inspired Suzanne to make a career shift and really start doing this work with other families in need. So she has been trained in all my methods. She's working under my direct mentorship, but she has that amazing specialization in pediatrics and in working with moms and families. And so she's still building up her caseload, so her schedule is pretty open. And so she can get you in pretty much right away and start working on a comprehensive plan to get your whole family to everyone's best health. We are also in plans to develop a more comprehensive family program that she will be running through the whole body healing umbrella. And so that probably won't be till the fall or winter though, but stay tuned if that's something you're interested in, like a bigger group kind of setting where you're following a structured program. That is something we're going to be rolling out and offering probably end of this year, early next year. But in the meantime, she is taking one-on-one clients and can get you started on your journey. So, excuse me. How do you know if your kid has a gut-brain axis disruption? And again, part of this is knowing what is actually normal childhood development and what are signs that there is a struggle or imbalance going on. So, and by normal, I mean, signs of just like the spectrum of, regular diversity that happens with kids. By not normal, I mean something that is actually a sign of an underlying illness or disease process going on. So it's not a judgment of bad or good. It's just showing like what is actually happening physiologically in the body and what are different indications of that in terms of surface symptoms. So it is very normal for kids to be very active, for kids to get into things, for kids to be constantly wanting to explore, to be curious, to be wanting to learn and experiment about things, to want to push kind of the limits of their body's capabilities, right? This is how kids build dexterity and flexibility and strength. And kind of understand how the world works, right? So it is normal for your kid to need to be running around outside every day in order to like sleep well that night and not be an absolute terror at the dinner table and things like that, right? So kids do need a lot of energy output and a lot of opportunities for dynamic exploration, So allowing your kid to have time where they are playing outdoors, where they are going to parks, where they are being able to climb on, in trees and on rocks ideally, but if that's not available to you in an urban setting, any kind of playground or going to museum, like interactive museums where they're able to, really just get to know themselves and get to know their world in these dynamic and creative ways. And kids will get difficult and hyperactive if they don't have those opportunities. So that is very, very normal. It's very normal for kids to want to push boundaries, and figure out like what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But what is not normal, what is signs of potential disruptions in the gut-brain axis, are kids who are excessively hyperactive. These are kids that are going to like never ever take naps, right? Who constantly need stimulation, who are just buzzing from one thing to the next without any downtime in between, or who are completely unable to focus on one task and complete one task, right? So there is some amount of activity, curiosity, all that kind of stuff that is very normal. But when you see these really excessive expressions of hyperactivity, where there is this constant extreme need for stimulation and complete inability to focus on a task, this is a sign that the brain is overactive, right? And usually that is related to a disruption in the production of neurotransmitters that is leading to either too many stimulating neurotransmitters, or conversely, right, not enough, where there's actually low amounts of dopamine activity happening in the brain. And so the kid is constantly seeking stimulation to try to get more brainwave activity in those parts of the brain. So regardless of exactly how it's manifesting for that kid, that is a sign that there is some imbalance happening that usually comes down to the gut and how well your gut is producing neurotransmitters and how that's getting into the brain in a balanced way. It is totally normal for kids to have strong emotions, right? And a lot of times, we're a few generations out from like Victorian era parenting, right? Where kids were meant to be, seen and not heard. So I think a lot of times we are multiple generations into not really knowing how to handle the strong emotions that are actually very natural and human that kids have, right? And so kids do need to be able to name their emotions, right? Be able to name like when they feel angry, when they feel sad, when they feel scared, right? When they feel guilty. And they need to be able to have a very regulated anchor point, right? Which is the parent, to help be a grounding force while they are experiencing and moving through strong emotions, right? So, kids are going to be angry, they're going to be sad, they're going to be frustrated, they're going to cry, right? All of that is very, very normal and actually very healthy emotional expression that they need to know how to be present with and allow to kind of flow through them and then release, right? Like they need to learn that like, oh, I can feel this emotion and it will be present for a moment and it'll be hard and it'll be uncomfortable and then it will settle, right? And so they need that feedback and that structure from the adults around them to help them work through their own feelings. What is not normal are extreme tantrums, severe separation anxiety, or hypersensitivity to pain or other stimuli, right? So it's one thing for your kid to get frustrated and angry and like throw a toy and things like that. I mean, those kinds of things are very, very normal, right? But these inconsolable extreme tantrums that a lot of young children get, sometimes this is actually a sign that the child's nervous system is agitated and irritated. And that can be from an overgrowth of bacteria that is sending a lot of stress hormones into the nervous system. It can be from, again, that imbalance of neurotransmitter production happening in the gut. But there is something happening where the nervous system is dysregulated, is overly agitated, right? And so things that would have just made another child just kind of like frustrated for a minute, is going to throw another kid into a completely inconsolable tantrum. So this is a sign that there is some kind of dysregulation happening in the nervous system that is likely related to the gut-brain axis. Again, kids who are extremely shy, right, who have very dramatic separation anxiety, right, this is often that there is higher levels of anxiety from this imbalanced neurotransmitter production. kids really should be pretty resilient to things like pain, and other difficult things that happen. I mean, of course, again, it's normal for a kid to cry when they get hurt and things like that. But kids who seem very overly sensitive to pain, this is a common thread that I see in a lot of my clients who end up developing more serious chronic illness later, is that they were just a very overly sensitive child, right? Whether emotionally or physically. It is normal for kids to have social conflict with their friends, like they're figuring out social hierarchy and conflict resolution skills and how to talk about their feelings with each other. So, I mean, having to help kids navigate some social situations is very normal. What is less normal is extremely antisocial behaviors, such as biting, hitting, difficulty connecting, or that extreme shyness, like I was talking about before. Obvious things, that are often associated with autism, like inability to make eye contact and things like that. Again, this is a sign that that social engagement system is not fully coming online. And the social engagement system in the brain comes online when our nervous system is very regulated and very overall, in a calm state by default, right? And when we feel chronically stressed or afraid, that social engagement system will not fully come online. And this is exacerbated by disruptions in the gut-brain axis. Again, an imbalance in hormones or neurotransmitters or chronic infections that are causing an excess release of stress hormones in the body. So these are all signs that there may be something deeper going on with your kiddo. It is very normal for kids to get sick a lot. But these should be fairly mild illnesses that are short and they get over and recover from quickly, right? Now, they can be acute and intense. Sometimes kids will spike fevers of 103 degrees or something like that, right? Kids can get very high fevers. They can have, they can just be down for the count, right? They're just in bed, for 2 days, just sick, delirious, all of that kind of stuff. That's actually very normal. It's very normal for kids to get flu and colds, and other of those common childhood illnesses that are pervasive, but they should be able to get through them and bounce back pretty quickly. Now, part of that is allowing the child to actually go through that process, because kids get sick so that they can fine-tune their immune system, right? Your immune system is gathering information about threats that it may encounter in the world throughout its life, and that is why we get sick as little kids. That is why we get a lot of these common childhood illnesses. We live in these big, diverse communities where you're going to be exposed to a lot of different pathogens and microbes and viruses and all these kinds of things. And kids need to have these finely tuned immune systems to be able to navigate, our social world where we're exchanging bacteria and microbes and viruses with all these people all the time. So kids need to go through that. It's very normal for a kid to get a flu or a cold every year, or have a lot of these other childhood illnesses, and you need to let them be sick, right? You should not be suppressing fevers unless, it starts to get dangerous, right? Where you get these very extreme fevers. I mean, usually that's getting up to more in the 104 range, or it's been days and days and days and the fever just won't go down, or you start to see signs of dehydration or other or more serious issues, right? Obviously, you need to seek medical attention when you start to feel uncomfortable with what is going on. You need to trust your instincts with that, but it is very normal for kids to get sick and sometimes get very high fevers, or throw up a lot. This is a cleansing and a purging mechanism that is very natural in the body. What is not normal is kids who are getting these very severe recurrent infections that don't seem to clear up without antibiotics, right? Now, we know now that antibiotics usually isn't actually even clearing these infections. It's just making them dormant for a while. We now know that when exposed to antibiotics, bacteria will just kind of morph and change form. It doesn't really kill the bacteria. It just stimulates a threat response in the bacteria, and so it makes them change form to be harder to detect, right? And they'll go dormant for a while, but then they'll come back even stronger, right? And this is how we get antibiotic resistance over time. But that being said, sometimes you will have a kiddo that is just having these brutal ear infections, or, staffers, strep infections, or bronchitis that just does not seem to go away without antibiotic intervention. So I do think that people jump the gun with antibiotics very often. Like, as soon as their kid gets a fever, or as soon as their kid gets a cough, they go straight to antibiotics. A lot of those times that kid probably would have been able to fight it off if you had given them time and you had nourished them correctly and, kept them warm and let them have a fever and just work it out themselves. So I always recommend that people give their kids a chance to really fight things off on their own, because their immune system will generally come out stronger on the other end of that. But if your kid is consistently really needing antibiotics to get over these recurrent infections, that is a sign that there is deeper immune system imbalance going on. Your kid's immune system should be strong enough to be able to overcome all of the kind of regular illnesses that we are exposed to, all the kind of regular bacteria and viruses that we are exposed to. And if your kid is having trouble with that and keeps having to take antibiotics, this is really setting them up for a lifetime of chronic illness, unfortunately. And so if that is a recurrent pattern with your kid, with like tonsillitis, strep, ear infections, bronchitis, things like this, that really indicates a need to look at that gut-brain axis and really start to look at gut health. Food. Okay, so picky eating is such a universal phenomenon, it seems like these days. It is actually not normal. If you look at people living in more traditional settings, kids aren't picky about what they're eating. They eat what everyone else eats, right? They eat what is available to them and their community, what is in season, right? So this idea of having to cater to a kid's picky eating is really misguided, and it really sets kids up for a really difficult life, actually. Because generally what's happening when a kid is having really picky eating preferences is that they already have a microbiome hijack, right? They already have a brain that is having preferences dictated by bacterial overgrowth, by candida overgrowth, by other types of imbalances in the gut microbiome. And if we cater to that, we are catering to that selfish colony of microbes that is really trying to take over in the gut. And again, this is really setting the kid up for a lifetime of struggles. And so we really need to nip this in the bud. The classic preferences of a kid who has a very disrupted gut-brain axis is that you cannot get them to eat meat or any vegetables to save your life, right? They will only eat things like milk, sweet yogurt, cereals, breads, crackers, fruits, muffins, things like this, right? That is like the entire diet of your kids. Like, maybe you can get them some protein if you give them like some yogurt that's been sweetened, right? But otherwise, all they want is like fruit and carbohydrates, right? This is a really bad sign, that some serious imbalance is going on in your kids' gut microbiome, and that their preferences have really been hijacked. Healthy kids will have shifts in their preferences over time. So often kids will go through phases where they don't want vegetables, or they're just not very hungry. Maybe they just don't want to eat much of anything, right? Or other times when they're just like ravenous, but a healthy kid should be craving things like meat and fat, and ideally these are the things that they're weaned on in the first place. I have a video on like pregnancy and weaning that you can go look at. Sally Fallon's Nourishing Traditions baby book is also a really great resource if you're interested in learning more about this. But so it is normal for kids' food preferences to shift throughout their life, but this like excessively picky eating and a lot of mixtures with like texture and smell and flavor, and always needing kind of these sweet flavors and these like starchy kind of refined carbohydrate textures, this is a really concerning sign that your kid's brain is really getting run by these microbes. Other issues very common for kids who have a disrupted gut-brain axis are going to be skin issues, right? Kids who are getting, rashes, eczema, things like this all the time, who have a lot of different food intolerances, right? Who maybe have been lactose intolerant since they were very young. Kids who are complaining about just stomach pains a lot, right? They're constipated or they're bloated, or they have really strange smelling stools, right? When they do go. And obviously neurological issues, right? Like a lot of kids have things like, not a lot, but it does happen where kids have things like convulsions and seizures and things like that. And these are more significant signs of a really disrupted gut brain axis that requires a little more careful intervention with. Okay, so how do you go about shifting this? So it can be really hard because a lot of times parents feel backed into a corner, right? Because often, right, all of these behaviors that we talked about are going along with the very picky eating. And so kids are like, well, parents are like, I just can't let my kids starve. True. And a child will not starve themselves, right? Like they won't do that. They have too much of a survival instinct, right? So you do have to really make firm, structured, gradual changes in your child's diet and routines that are going to help them start to rebalance that gut-brain axis. Dr. Natasha's Yellow Gaps book is a great place to start to learn more about how you can roll out some of these methods. Honestly, a lot of it comes back down to like classical conditioning, right? Of teaching the kid like, okay, if you have one bite of this food, if you have one sip of this broth, then you can go do this thing that you really enjoy doing, and trying to use rewards that are non-food based as much as possible so you can start to wean out the foods that are like the refined carbohydrates, and all the lactose, heavy lactose foods like milk and not very well fermented yogurts and things like that, that are actually exacerbating the problem, unfortunately, right? That are actually feeding the imbalance in the gut-brain axis that are causing all of these symptoms in the first place. So you've got to start weaning off those foods and replacing it with foods that are going to be nourishing for the immune system and for the brain and are going to help that whole system rebalance. But it really is the key of just these slow, gradual, very structured changes. And this can be a lot to take on for a family. It can be very, very stressful, especially if you have a kid that has tantrums, or like other of these behavioral issues that are really, emotionally difficult, to handle day to day. And so that's why we are really offering, in the future, we'll be offering a really structured program for helping you go through this. But in the meantime, Suzanne is there to really help you get set up with a plan that is going to work for your family, because it can be really hard to yourself like figure out what the plan for implementing all of this work is going to be. So I hope that this video is helpful to give you a sense of like, okay, this is probably just normal kid behaviors, and this is something that is maybe an indication that we really do need to intervene now. And I really do encourage you to take those signs I'm talking about seriously, almost universally, when I'm doing intakes with clients and I'm getting their health history, and now they have all these really severe chronic illnesses as an adult. They had all these signs and symptoms when they were little kids, and so if we can intervene sooner, we save so much suffering and hardship and lost time and energy and money in the long term. So Suzanne is there to help you get started, and make sure you subscribe and get on my mailing list and follow me so you know about updates in programs and offerings that we have over at Whole Body Healing.